At exactly 7:20 a.m., a neighbour would answer their doorbell to find a man drenched in blood, begging for help. But why was this man covered in blood? And what tragedy was he claiming had just occurred inside his house? Let's find out.
Try to see the good in people, even though they took advantage of that.
And even though it was not a good situation, stay in it.
It was disbelief. You just don't think that, this could ever happen to your family.
Kristen Chavez had everything going for her. At 32 years old, she was a dedicated paralegal working in Houston's legal community with dreams that stretched far beyond her current position. Her family described her as brilliant, someone who loved the law and harbored ambitions of becoming an attorney. Kristen had chosen a profession that reflected her deepest values. The paralegal field in Texas is highly regarded, requiring either formal education through ABA-approved programs or extensive experience combined with specialized training. For someone like Kristen, who possessed both intellectual curiosity and a genuine desire to help others, it was the perfect stepping stone toward her ultimate goal of practicing law. Her work involved conducting legal research, drafting documents, case management, and providing crucial support to attorneys. Skills that would serve her well in her planned transition to law school. But what truly defined Kristen wasn't just her professional aspirations, it was her heart. Her brother Devin would later say, "My sister was my best friend. My ride or die." Her mother, Laura Bell, remembered her daughter as someone who was very logical. She was the voice of reason. She was headstrong in a positive way. Crime Stoppers advocate Andy Kahan, who worked closely with her family after her death, would recall people were drawn to her. She had a way of making everybody think they were her friend. And then there were her dogs. 4 beloved companions who weren't just pets to Kristen, they were her children. Her sister Julia would explain, she doesn't have any children, so these dogs are her babies. Among them was a 10-year-old dachshund named Peaches, who held a special place in Kristen's heart. She lived in Houston's Oak Forest neighborhood with her husband, 34-year-old Chant Zane Chavez, in what should have been a sanctuary of love and security. Their home was located at Emma Forest Street, in a community known for being family-friendly and welcoming. To outsiders, Kristen and Chance seemed like any other married couple building a life together in this idyllic setting. They appeared to have found their place in a community that prided itself on being unofficially Houston's most friendly neighborhood. But appearances, as Kristen's family would come to understand, can be devastatingly deceiving. Those closest to Kristen would realize that the woman they loved had been carrying a burden far heavier than anyone could have imagined. Behind the facade of a normal marriage in the picture-perfect Oak Forest community, a different reality was unfolding. Kristen's mother Laura would later reveal a truth that cut to the heart of their family's pain. "My daughter was incredibly talented, loving, full of integrity, and so much more. A light beaming despite her marriage situation. She suffered silently." The words "marriage situation" carried a weight that would become clearer as investigators began piecing together the truth about Kristen's life with Chance. Her brother Devin offered a glimpse into what the family had observed, saying, "She tried to see the good in people even though they tried to take advantage of that." This pattern, of Kristen's generous nature being exploited, was something that would become a recurring theme as more details emerged about her relationship. Her mother would describe the heartbreaking reality. Even though it was not a good situation, staying in it, hoping that things will change. Prosecutor Steve Walsh would reveal during court proceedings that the couple had a history of domestic violence, but none that had resulted in prior charges. This detail painted a troubling picture: violence that existed in the shadows, incidents that never made it to official reports, suffering that remained hidden from the legal system that might have protected her. the hidden nature of this abuse reflects a devastating reality about domestic violence. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. Yet much of this violence goes unreported, happening behind closed doors in homes that appear normal to the outside world. For Kristen, her family would later recognize the warning signs had been there. But domestic violence has a way of making victims feel responsible for the abuse, making them believe they can fix their partner or that the abuse is somehow their fault. Kristen's natural tendency to see the good in people and her belief in the power of love and commitment likely made it even harder for her to accept that her marriage was dangerous. The isolation that often accompanies domestic violence may have been particularly cruel for someone like Kristen, who thrived on connecting with others. When someone controls your access to money, your ability to work, or your financial resources, leaving becomes exponentially more difficult. But, as investigators would discover, Kristen had been more than just hoping for change. According to her mother's devastating revelation, he knew she was finally going to leave him. These words would prove to be the key to understanding what happened on that March morning. Kristen hadn't just been enduring, she had been planning her escape. But leaving isn't simply a matter of walking out the door. It requires careful safety planning, often involving law enforcement, domestic violence advocates, and safe housing arrangements. The victim must consider not just their own safety, but often the safety of children, pets, and other family members who might become targets of the abuser's rage. In Kristen's final weeks, her family would describe her as someone who was learning and just growing and evolving into the woman she wanted to be. It was as if she was preparing for a new chapter in her life, one that would no longer include the man who was supposed to protect her, but someone else was making plans too, and those plans would ensure that Kristen would never get the chance to start over. The tragic reality is that for many domestic violence victims, the moment they find the courage to leave becomes the moment of greatest danger. What should be the beginning of freedom instead becomes a race against time, and for Kristen Chavez, time would run out. March 12th, 2025, began like any other Wednesday morning in the quiet Oak Forest neighborhood. But at approximately 7:20 a.m., the tranquility was shattered when HPD officers responded to what was initially called a suspicious event in the 5100 block of Emma Forest Street. What they found would haunt even the most experienced first responders. The sequence of events that led to that emergency call painted a picture of calculated cruelty that extended far beyond the murder itself. According to investigators and family members, Chance had begun his horrific plan hours before police arrived. Just hours before she was found dead, Chance Chavez stole Kristen's 4 beloved dogs and abandoned them on the side of the Katy freeway. Among them was Peaches, the 10-year-old dachshund who was particularly special to Kristen. The timing of this cruelty was deliberate. By taking and abandoning her dogs, Chance was attacking Kristen's heart before he attacked her body. For someone who loved animals as deeply as Kristen did, discovering that her beloved companions had been thrown away like garbage would have been emotionally devastating. Then came the violence. When police arrived at Emma Forest Street, they found a scene that defied the peaceful reputation of the Oak Forest community. Upon arrival, they observed a male, Chavez, standing in the doorway with his hands up. The male had blood on his arms, legs, and clothing, the official police report stated. The sight was so disturbing that officers immediately secured Chance in the back of a patrol car before beginning their search of the house. But the blood on Chance's clothes was nothing compared to what awaited them inside the home. A female, Chavez's wife, was discovered unresponsive in a bedroom. She had suffered blunt force trauma to her body and was pronounced deceased by paramedics. The crime scene told a story of unimaginable violence. investigators determined that Chance had used a clothing iron to repeatedly strike Kristen. The weapon of choice was particularly disturbing. A household item, something mundane and everyday, turned into an instrument of murder. The iron was found broken in 2 pieces near her body, indicating the extreme force with which it had been used. But the violence hadn't been contained to just the murder weapon. The room also had several holes in the wall, according to court paperwork, suggesting a prolonged and brutal attack that had damaged the bedroom itself. What investigators pieced together was a scene of domestic terror that escalated far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. The evidence suggested that this wasn't a crime of sudden passion, but rather the culmination of something that had been building for some time. The meticulous planning involved in disposing of the dogs, combined with the extreme violence of the murder, painted a picture of premeditated rage. The timeline of events becomes even more chilling when viewed in sequence. First, Chance had systematically removed the beings Kristen loved most, her dogs, and abandoned them where they could have died from traffic, weather, or predators. Then, he had brutally murdered his wife using a household item, turning their bedroom into a scene of carnage. But the timeline reveals something even more disturbing about Chance's actions after the murder. According to police accounts, a neighbor called authorities after Chance Chavez rang their doorbell last Wednesday morning. They said he was covered in blood. This neighbor would later tell police that Chance Chavez told him something tragic had just happened in his home. The calculated nature of this final act is particularly disturbing. After committing murder, Chance had the presence of mind to approach a neighbor and claim that something tragic had happened, as if he were a victim of circumstances rather than the perpetrator of horrific violence. When police arrived and found Chance standing in the doorway of the home with his hands up, investigators noted that he was incoherent, making it difficult to gather information from him about what happened. Whether this incoherence was genuine shock, a deliberate act, or the result of whatever mental state had led to the violence, it meant that crucial time was lost in understanding what had transpired. What happened next would determine whether justice could be served for Kristen Chavez, and whether her beloved dogs, the innocent victims of Chance's cruelty, could be saved. In the days following Kristen's murder, her family faced not only the devastating loss of their daughter and sister, but also the urgent search for her beloved dogs. 3 of the 4 animals were recovered thanks to the tireless efforts of friends, strangers, and social media campaigns. Her mother said, "We're so thankful for the support we received from people we don't even know." Finding the dogs felt like a miracle. But the search for Peaches, the 10-year-old dachshund who had been Kristen's special companion, ended in heartbreak. The 4th dog, Peaches, was found dead in a plastic bag alongside the side of a road nearby. As the legal process began, Kristen's family found themselves fighting not just for justice, but for the basic assurance that her killer would remain behind bars. Chance Chavez had been charged with murder, but his initial bond was set at only $250,000, an amount that outraged those who knew the brutality of what he had done. Kristen Chavez was a victim of incessant domestic violence and abuse, which ultimately led to her murder by her own husband, Chance Zane Chavez, at the tender age of 32. The family wrote in a petition that would gather over 8,000 signatures. The family's fight for a higher bond wasn't just about this one case. It represented a larger battle against a system that seemed to undervalue the lives of domestic violence victims. Crime Stoppers advocate Andy Kahan worked closely with the family, expressing frustration with the legal limitations. Currently, judges must grant a bond unless the charge is capital murder. We want to give them more latitude, because when you see a case like this, where the defendant poses a clear threat to public safety, it's frustrating that he still has the chance to post bond. When Chance was scheduled to appear in court, he initially refused to leave his jail cell, forcing authorities to send a trio of specialized deputies brought him before the judge. Eventually, the judge raised the bond to $500,000, though prosecutors had originally requested $1 million. Even with the increased bond, the family's concern remained. Would this be enough to keep a man who had brutally murdered his wife from walking free while awaiting trial? And in a case involving such extreme domestic violence, should bond have been granted at all? Chance's attorney described his client as being in shock, as if the gravity of what he had done was only beginning to register. But for Kristen's family, there was no confusion about what had happened. What he did to her and what she endured was horrific. He wasn't insane. It was premeditated and calculated, her mother stated with painful clarity. As Chance Zane Chavez awaits trial for killing his wife, Kristen, her family seeks justice while honoring her memory. Her case highlights the growing crisis of domestic violence in Houston, where leaving is often the most dangerous time. Her family shares her story to raise awareness and help protect others. Justice was what Kristen had planned to pursue in her career as an attorney. Now, it's what her family pursues in her memory, hoping that her death will not be in vain and that her story will save others from the same fate.